Welcome back to The Explainer. If you've ever been close to a toxic relationship or maybe lived through one yourself, you know there is just this profound disconnect between what it looks like on the outside and what it actually feels like on the inside. So today, our goal is to uncover the invisible, underlying psychological mechanisms of toxic relationships. We're going to decode the science of narcissistic abuse and give you a real clinical framework for understanding what's actually happening behind closed doors.
It is the single most frustrating, most common, and frankly most judgmental question asked by friends, family, and society at large. Well, why don't they just leave? The assumption there is that staying in a toxic dynamic is a simple choice, right? Maybe it's a character flaw or a sign of low self-esteem. But what if I told you the answer to this question isn't about willpower at all? We're actually going to answer this with some surprising, undeniable biology.
Okay, let's really dive into this. Consider this exhausting 60-40 split. In clinical literature, there's this example of a partner who is, 60% spectacular. They're warm, they're attentive, they plan amazing trips, and they make you feel entirely understood. But the other 40%, it's a total nightmare. Completely without warning, they just withdraw, they become cold, highly critical, they pick trivial fights, and leave you in sheer panic. And you end up hooked, right? You're desperately analyzing your own behavior, just hoping that if you love them perfectly enough, that 40% nightmare will just magically disappear. Section 1, the toxic slot machine and trauma bonds.
Now, this dynamic brings us straight to the work of B.F. Skinner on operant conditioning. Intermittent reinforcement is exactly what it sounds like. A reward is delivered unpredictably. It's literally the exact psychological mechanism behind a slot machine. Think about it. If a machine paid out every single time, you'd get bored. If it never paid out, you'd just walk away. But because it pays out unpredictably, you keep pulling the lever, totally convinced the jackpot is next. In a toxic relationship, that hot and cold partner is the slot machine, and your nervous system becomes the gambler.
Let's contrast these two states for a second. Predictable love gives your nervous system a nice, calm baseline. You feel safe, but safety doesn't produce a massive chemical spike. Intermittent reinforcement, on the other hand, throws your nervous system into absolute chaos. That cold withdrawal triggers a massive spike in cortisol and adrenaline. That is panic and fear. Then, when the partner finally returns with affection, your brain releases a flood of dopamine and oxytocin. It creates this incredibly intense chemical high that immediately follows a terrifying low. And that wild chemical roller coaster leads us to a really powerful realization from the clinical research. You are not addicted to the person. You are addicted to the relief from the pain that the person caused. Just let that sink in for a moment. It completely reframes the victim's internal experience. The relief feels intoxicating. It feels like salvation. But honestly, it's really just the cessation of manufactured panic. This constant cycling leads directly to trauma bonding. When the person who is terrifying you is also the exact same person who can comfort you, your brain literally confuses the intensity of survival panic with the intensity of love. The abuser keeps the victim completely off balance, constantly guessing, ensuring that their entire focus remains locked onto the relationship.
Section 2, flipping the script, DARVO.
DARVO is a helpful acronym that perfectly deconstructs this manipulation. Step 1 is deny. They say, that never happened. Step 2 is attack. They pivot and say, you're the one with the issues. Step 3 is reverse victim and offender. Suddenly they're saying, you're hurting me by even bringing this up. They completely deny any wrongdoing, go straight on the offensive, and flip the narrative so they look like the victim and you look like the aggressor. The reason DARVO is so incredibly effective is its speed. It hits your emotions fast. Most people just don't expect to be attacked or blamed when they're simply raising a valid concern. This rapid shock tactic completely twists the facts, induces immediate guilt, and basically shuts the victim down. It leaves you backtracking, confused, and feeling powerless, which of course is exactly where the manipulator wants you to be. This core motif is brilliantly illustrated by clinical literature, like the book When Shame Begets Shame. Narcissists and toxic manipulators rely heavily on tactics like DARVO, because at their core, they are fundamentally protecting their own extremely fragile self-image. To avoid feeling any shame themselves, they weaponize it. They deliberately hurt and shame their victims, effectively offloading their own internal deficits onto the very person who is just trying to love them. Section 3. The internal toll. Identity erosion. To truly grasp identity erosion, I want you to imagine a campfire. Your inner light, your old self, is a bright, determined fire. You have motivation and purpose. Psychological abuse is basically like someone walking up and repeatedly kicking dirt onto your campfire.
You try your best to rebuild it, but they just keep kicking more dirt. Over time, the wood no longer supports the flame, the winds of self-doubt disrupt it, and eventually, despite your absolute best efforts, your vibrant inner fire slowly burns out. You just don't recognize who you are anymore.
So, what exactly is the dirt being kicked on the fire? Well, it's the daily gaslighting and labeling. It's hearing things like, you're overly sensitive, you can't take a joke, you're the crazy one, or my personal favorite, that never even happened. Every single time you are gaslit with these labels, a little more dirt smothers your fire. You start walking on eggshells, silencing your own truth just to avoid punishment and secure a few measly crumbs of peace.
Section 4. Breaking the cycle.
It paints a pretty heavy picture, doesn't it? But understanding the trap is literally the very first step to escaping it. So the crucial point here is that we have to fundamentally change the way we talk about this. Society always asks, why didn't she leave? Or why did he stay? This narrative unfairly locates the problem entirely within the victim's choices. The systemic truth, the real question we should be asking, is why did the abuser use intermittent reinforcement and coercive control to trap them in the first place? Shifting this narrative away from victim blaming is an absolutely vital defense for anyone trying to heal.
Now, when a person does summon the incredible strength to leave, they immediately hit what attachment pioneer John Bowlby called the protest phase. This is so critical to understand. When an infant is separated from a caregiver, it protests, because to an infant, separation equals death. In a trauma-bonded adult, the neurobiological response is identical. Your logical brain knows you're doing the right thing, but your mammalian brain triggers severe withdrawal. Leaving literally feels like a life-threatening emergency to your nervous system. And this leads to a profoundly confusing state called the both and. If you are going through this, you really need profound empathy for yourself right now. You can know with absolute objective certainty that the relationship is toxic and destroying you, and at the exact same time, your nervous system can be absolutely screaming for the dopamine hit of your ex's return. Both of these conflicting realities genuinely exist at the same time. You aren't crazy, you are literally just in withdrawal. Because you are in withdrawal, breaking an intermittent reinforcement cycle requires treating the breakup like a severe addiction recovery. So, here are the 4 clinical steps to detox. 1. Absolute no contact. You simply can't heal from a slot machine addiction while you're still living in the casino. 2. Expect the protest phase. Name the panic when it hits and just ride the wave. 3. Regulate your nervous system. Replace those chaotic spikes with exercise, cold water exposure, or deep pressure therapy. And 4. Do the family of origin work. Look back and heal the original childhood wounds that made unpredictable love feel like home in the first place.
We also need to set some realistic expectations here. Rebuilding your inner campfire does not happen overnight. Clinical experts note that it can take anywhere from 1 to 2 years to fully clear the conditioning, depending on the length of the abuse. The acute panic might fade in a few months, but the deeper structural psychological recovery takes dedicated time, so be super gentle with yourself.
As you heal, you have to fundamentally retrain your brain. You must learn to accept that boring consistency is actually safety. You have to literally teach your nervous system that peace, not chaotic intensity, is what true love looks like. That hot and cold cycle you went through, that was a trauma response, not passion. Which brings us to our final thought. Armed with the science of trauma bonds, DARVO, and identity erosion, you now have the tools to view your relational ledger with clear, objective eyes. So I leave you with this question to reflect on. Are you ready to stop pulling the slot machine lever, walk out of the casino, and finally rebuild your campfire? The withdrawal will end, I promise you. And on the other side is a quiet, steady peace that belongs entirely to you. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into the source material here on The Explainer. Until next time, stay curious and stay empowered.